Welcome to the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast, a peek into the minds and strategies of the world's greatest copywriters, marketers, and persuasion experts. And now, here's your host, Brian Casangina.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Geniuses of Copywriting podcast. I've got a very special guest on the podcast today. He's a true legend of the industry, and it's not really meant to be like a poke and fun about the amount of time you've been doing this, although that certainly gives you a level of credibility. So Drayton Bird, thanks for coming on the call with me.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Ever since we spoke at the event in Poland together earlier this year, I've really followed a lot of your stuff, but let's start with your story and where you come from, because I know a couple of things that we're going to cover, but I'd love to hear it straight from the horse's mouth.
Well, this particular horse has been at this game for 50 odd years. I started out as a journalist and realised I couldn't make any money. Went into advertising in Manchester, which is where I was really brought up. But there was no money in Manchester. The basic deal in Manchester with the employer and the employee was that the employer would pay the employee as little as possible. And I always remember when my first book came out, which was a novel back in 1964, I was interviewed on television by Parkinson, and he asked me, and he had a show then up in Manchester called Scene at 6:30, and he said, "Why are you deserting the North?" Which was bloody hilarious, because he proceeded to do exactly the same thing the next year. And I said, because nobody will pay me any money here. In Manchester, they say, well, keep this young bugger down, don't pay him too much. Whereas in London, they would say, he seems a bright young lad, we'll pay him a lot of money. So I got out of Manchester and Liverpool, where I had my first job, went down to London, worked for an agency called Burnett, where I was actually trained one day by the original of Don Draper in Mad Men. The character that Don Draper was mostly based on was a man called Draper Daniels, who worked at Burnett in Chicago.
Yeah, that's
Leo
what I was
Burnett
about
in
to ask
London
you.
was the agency I was working for, and he came along with another guy to teach us how to present. After that, I became a creative director of an agency, only about 80 odd people. And then I was very keen to get rich through mail order.
Yeah.
How naive. And I tried a number of things, and eventually I was responsible for selling a thing called the Bull Worker, which was sold all over the world. And strangely enough, lots of copywriters seem to have used it.
The Bull Worker?
Yeah, it's a bodybuilding device.
Okay.
It's sold. My copy ran all over the world: Japan, Africa, everywhere. So that's how I really got started on the entrepreneurial side of the mail order business. And then I started an agency. I started a business with a friend. We went broke. We went broke so spectacularly, and I had so much money to the tax man that I spent the next 7 years living under a false name.
Wow.
Working all over the world, including Australia, oddly enough. And eventually, I decided with some friends to start a direct marketing agency. And at that time, we're talking about 1970, 77. Direct marketing was beginning to come up. And within 3.5 years, we were the biggest direct marketing agency in Britain. And we were bought by Ogilvy and Mather because of a conversation I had with David Ogilvy. Then I became the worldwide creative head of Ogilvy Direct, which is now called Ogilvy One. I think it's all called Ogilvy now. And I worked with David for about 8 years. Then I started my own business again, an agency. And I'm a one-trick pony. I've done the same damn thing for all these years. And I still bang out copy every day. But at the moment, I'm in a state of advanced panic and misery because I've been working for the last few months on my autobiography, which is called You Did What? Mainly because even I can't believe some of the things I did. It's coming out today. It's going to print in about half an hour. So I'm sitting here, SHITTING myself. But it's got a very good, very good introduction by a man I trained, who's now the vice chairman of Ogilvy and Mather here. Very funny introduction. And away we go. It's my fifth book, and I'm not sure I could stand the pressure again.
Well, I think this one's gonna be the best yet. If any of the stories that you were telling during the event in Poland, if that's anything to go on, it's going to be very interesting and entertaining book.
That was one of the worst birthday presents I've ever had. Trevor Crook said, "Come over to Poland and we'll celebrate your birthday," and all I got was a load of hangovers.
Yeah, he has that effect on people.
And the strange thing is, I used to live with a Polish girl years ago. I've actually had the unique distinction, or failure, of having 3 women try to kill me. She was the second. The third was my last wife, and the very first one was a lady I was living with when I was in the advertising business, and I came home one day, and this lady, actually, her previous profession had been providing refreshment for gentlemen of a sexual nature, and she'd been fitted up by the police and had to get a proper job as part of her probation. And the proper job she got was being my secretary. And boy, she taught me a few things. But strangely enough, bearing in mind what she'd done for a living previously, she was the most jealous woman I'd ever met. And she tried to kill me. She tried to stab me. Right. If I hadn't been wearing a beautiful new mushroom suede coat, which I still miss, I would be dead. So that's how I got my first adventure in the world of romance. That's not true. I had at least one before that.
First of many. Yeah, that's what I'm really looking at for the book to come out. Is that going to be on Amazon or your own site?
It's going to be. We're printing it ourselves. We've got I think something like 400,000 emails going out from various people. Some of the people actually that we met in Poland are promoting it. And I'm going to have a big. This is actually interesting for those of you who study, and I suppose you all do study marketing, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this. David Ogilvy, when I worked with him, had a concept which he called orchestration. And essentially, it was the idea, pretty obvious when you think about it, but very often obvious things are overlooked. In fact, I always remember the brilliant Indian I worked with at Ogilvy, who ran India for us, and he once started a speech by saying the obvious is always overlooked. So what Ogilvy's idea was, if you got all the media all together to launch the same products at the same time, as he put it, you should give many instruments, one big noise. So I've got a lot of people, in fact, 6 days from now, we'll be sending out emails all over the place to pester people.
Yeah, I definitely want to send out an email to my list as well. So I'm going to get back to your lovely PA on that.
Thank you.
I definitely
Matt that you met. He's promoting it. I think he's got a very large list, 60,000 or something like that.
That's a good size. But yeah.
I've lost count of how many people are actually sending things out.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you do a big broadcast like that, you sort of that the book is instantly going to be everywhere. Like in everyone's inbox. So
well, it should do. I mean, one always worries. I think that people who are, in my experience of business, that the people who are confident, overconfident, are idiots. The people that I've worked with who are really good are the people who worry. Ogilvy used to worry terribly. The people I found who are no good at all are the ones who think they're wonderful and spend their lives patting themselves on the back.
True.
I think if you want to succeed in any activity whatsoever, the first thing you should give thought to is what can go wrong. The great, probably the best business writer of the 20th century, certainly one of the best business writers, was Peter Drucker. And Peter Drucker once said the first aim of business is to avoid making a loss. So that's the way I start. I always start with everything. If I've got to make a speech to someone, I always think what can go wrong. If I've got to, I don't just sort of bounce onto the platform and start talking rubbish. I wait for a few minutes, then I start talking rubbish. But I always, I spend a lot of time. I would say if I've got to make a speech for an hour, presentation for an hour, it'd probably take me a couple of weeks to sort out exactly what I'm going to say, because once you've worked out exactly what you're going to say, then you can focus on how you're going to say it. This is like the difference in marketing between strategy and tactics. Everybody nowadays uses the word strategy very loosely. They apply it to very, very simple things that you're doing. That's really tactics, yeah? Strategy is the whole basis, the whole approach, the whole way you're thinking about things, the whole way you're positioning something. I mean, if you take the book is called You Did What? And I spend a lot of time thinking about the title. The title is the headline. The first book I ever wrote when I was 26, I think, 25, was called Some Rats Run Faster. And I always thought about the title. The title is just like the headline in your ad, the subject line in your email. People tend to write stuff without thinking, what is the most important element in this? Again, Ogilvy used to say that 75 people will never get beyond the headline, 75%. So that's what you must spend your time thinking about. How do I get people interested? It's rather the same on a different scale of importance. It's rather like thinking about how you can improve what you sell. How you can improve what you sell is infinitely more important than what you how you sell it. The first thing is, how can I offer a better product? Lester Wonderman, who's started an agency, died a couple of years ago. I nearly sold my business to him, actually. His brother, he had a brother who said something very interesting. He said, the most important question in marketing is, to whom are you offering what ultimate benefit? That's what you have to spend your time thinking about. When you're thinking about what kind of business should I have? And when you're thinking about how do I talk about this business? How do I present it? How do I sell it? It's all about to whom am I offering what ultimate benefit? You know, it's, but people don't think deeply enough about marketing. They're very slapdash. And I would suggest, in fact, that in my lifetime, people have become much sloppier. And they've become much sloppier for 2 or 3 reasons. And the first is that there is such a huge number of options today whereby you can sell. That's a confusing factor. The second is even more tricky, which is that these options can often fuddle you when you consider what you should be doing. You're so busy looking at your options, you're not thinking about the essential thing. Why the hell should anyone buy this? And can I, well, you have to picture in your mind, who am I talking to? There was a great advertising man called Fairfax Cohn, who was one of the founders of a huge agency called Foot, Cohn and Belding. And I once saw somebody describe how he went about reviewing copy.
Yeah.
And he used to sit, he'd review the copy by, he'd read it on, and then he'd look at the copywriter and he'd say, would you say that to someone you know? And if you read the shit, the absolute shit that you see today, particularly on the internet, you have to say, would I say that to someone?
No,
I saw
totally
something this
unrealistic.
morning because I'm fascinated by everything to do with communication, and it was an email, and it said the best digital statistics we've seen this week. That was the head of the thing, and I thought that's right. That message is rather like somebody just saying, "This is the biggest pile of dog shit I've just jumped in this week." Yeah,
yeah.
I'm amazed at the stuff that goes on. Anyhow, I should shut up.
No, I'd rather you not shut up, because I'm really enjoying this. You know, the perspective of somebody who's been in the industry for a long time and has done all the stuff that you've done. I mean, some of the adventures that I can't wait to read about in your book, both real life and in the business world. Or I suppose the two of them merge a lot of the time, I would imagine.
Well, what's interesting is the way things have changed in two respects, two particular respects. Let's take one. The very first job I ever got which was in Liverpool, I was desperate. I discovered sex, and as soon as I discovered sex, I unfortunately hadn't discovered contraception, and so I found myself with a wife and a child and no money, living in a house in a suburb of Manchester called Ashton-under-Lyne. I didn't know. I was working as a journalist, making hardly any money, £6 a week, I think, £7 a week. Gives you an idea what's happened to money. And a friend of mine said to me, he said, you know, you do well in advertising. I knew nothing about advertising. Actually, most people in advertising still know nothing about advertising. That's another subject. But so I went to the library and I looked for all the books on advertising, both of them. I found both of them. One was no good, but one was a very good book called Copy, the Core of Advertising. And it was by a man with a strange name, Aesop Glim. It was actually, it wasn't his real name, it was a pen name. But I'd always been interested in going into the law, but I could see that it was a hard way to make money. The chances were against you. And at that time, anyhow. And I suddenly realized when I read this book, this is like the commercial equivalent of the law. You're persuading people to buy this rather than that, as opposed to saying you're persuading somebody to say they're not guilty when they are, or whatever it may be. Yeah. So I was completely fascinated by that. And so I then did something which most people don't do. I went to read any book on advertising I could get. Huh? I mean, I remember talking about 6 years ago to an audience which had a number of people from Ogilvy and Mather in it. And I asked them how many had read Ogilvy on advertising, which is one of the best books ever written on this subject. Most of them hadn't read it. And I said, what is your problem? I said, that's like saying you're a Christian, but you've never read the Bible. The people are staggeringly ignorant. And they're encouraged to be ignorant. What I did, in fact, was in my first job, they gave me 3 things to do. One was to write some advertisements for a chain of restaurants. One was to write a brochure about seed cleaning machinery. Very technical.
Seed cleaning? I'd never heard
And the
of
other
it.
was to write what they called a salesman's organizer. That's the thing that salesmen took round when they were doing a pitch to a customer. And that was for a brand of sausages, which still exists, called Richmond Pork Sausages. So they gave me 3 entirely different things to do, different media, different kinds of products. And in those days, it was expected that you could do these things, whereas nowadays people specialize. People say, what niche are you in? Or in America, they say, what niche? Well, I'm not in any bloody niche or niche. As far as I'm concerned, if you've got it and you want to sell it, I'll sell it for you. And I don't think people think that way now. And I think it's a great loss. Yeah,
I agree.
I think the other thing that's happened is the greatest development in of the online business, the greatest aspect of the online business is that it discourages people from thinking. And a very good example is LinkedIn. You look at LinkedIn, and what LinkedIn does is it basically says, we'll just do what we say and you'll do okay, and we'll do it all for you. You don't have to think. You don't. So you write to somebody and they don't have to think. They say yes, no, maybe, great, blah, blah, blah. And, yeah. They're not actually required to sit down and bloody write something. Yeah. The whole thing is geared to prevent you to think. Yeah. So if you take something like Alexa, it's geared to make it easy. Yeah. And if it's easy, it means you don't have to think. And the brain is the biggest muscle in the body. It needs fucking exercise. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
all these things that are preventing people from doing the things they need to do to succeed in the big wide world. What you need to do to succeed is to have to fight. Yeah. If you don't fight, you become flabby, your brain becomes flabby, and you fail. And people do not study. I mean, I have a website which with a very, very original name, Drayton Bird. It's called DraytonBird.com. How about that? And at the top right, I say, how would you like 51 helpful ideas? And I also say, and how would you like a copy of the best book on advertising ever written? And I don't know how many people who are listening to this, but I'll tell you, I know most of them have not read this book. I'm absolutely certain. The book, of course, is Scientific Advertising, written in 1926. The best book ever written about advertising. It's only 42 pages long, didn't take a long time to read. David Ogilvy said, this book changed the course of my life. I must have read it 20 times. Most people in advertising haven't read it. Most people in marketing haven't read it. Crazy. People are just very, very ignorant. So many of them come into this business because somebody says, I'm going to teach you to be a copywriter, even if you can't bloody read or write, you know. Promises are made. Promises are made on the internet today that would have had you shot years ago. Yeah. I remember in the 70s when I was living under a false name. I lived under the name of my second wife's first husband, David D. McMahon. I was known for 7 years because I owed so much money from the taxman because I'd gone broke that I had to hide. I had to do all these things in those years that you didn't have to do, you know, that were difficult, hard work. I remember going to Australia trying to sell swimming pools. Fancy going to Australia trying to sell swimming pools. I went to Australia trying to sell fake Chagall paintings. All sorts of things to make money. But people, most people don't know what they're doing nowadays. They really don't.
What's the strangest thing that you've done to make money?
One of the strangest, and I did many. I mean, the number of things I did during the 7 years when I say I was in the wilderness. I sold swimming pool franchises in France and Germany. And I remember and I'd never sold, I hate selling. I'm very frightened of, you know, face-to-face selling. I'm a writer. And I was sent to France by this ex-mafia guy that I was working for called Sammy Gold. Yeah. And I knew some people in the advertising business in Paris, and I managed to get one of them to lend me an office. And I ran an ad in Le Figaro, which is a bit like the Times and one of the two big papers in France. And it got lots of replies. And I'd booked the office, and the first prospect came in. And I speak a bit of French, and I said, est-ce que vous parlez anglais, monsieur? Do you speak English, sir? Absolument pas. He said, no, absolutely not. My French came back very, very quickly. And eventually, I don't know, maybe 20 people I saw. One man was interested, and his name was Monsieur le Comte Philippe Jalon de la Beau. He was an aristocrat. And he had a lot of money. I sold him France. I sold in France, and I sold in France. We closed the deal in a club on the Ile-de-France in Paris. And afterwards, he introduced me to a very, very agreeable young lady with whom I spent the night. And I didn't realise it at the time, but now I come to think of it now. She was probably doing it for money, but I think we had a great time. So then Sammy Gold, my boss, he said, right, go and do Germany. Now, I don't speak German.
Mm.
I went to Germany and I wasn't able to sell. I just sold a bit of Germany.
Yeah, only a little bit.
And Sam was, how shall I say, very casual. And I was staying in this big hotel called the Hessische Hof, a posh hotel in Frankfurt. I couldn't pay the bill. Sammy had vanished. And I remember, how am I going to do? And I was living on sandwiches and that sort of thing. Where was he? And it turned out he'd gone to Ireland on some jaunt or other, and eventually got me out of there. But that was a terrifying experience.
Yeah.
So I didn't like doing that. I think trying to sell fake Chagall paintings in Australia, that was pretty odd as well. Yeah, there was a very famous fake painter, and I was trying to flog his stuff. And I stayed with my second wife was a Maori princess, and she'd gone to Australia. She was actually quite well known. And when I met her, I thought she was bullshitting me because she said told me about all the people she'd met, Frank Sinatra,
Yeah.
And until I didn't discover until a little later that what she told me was true. And her best friend was the mistress of the crime lord of Sydney, whose name I can't remember. But she was extraordinary. I went to stay with her mother and father, a stepfather, who lived in Sylvania Waters. And I always remember that was the first time and only time I ever caught a fish. But I used to go to Australia a lot. You live in Thailand?
Oh, we travel around. Yeah, we live in Thailand, but the first 40 years of my life, I grew up in Australia.
Yeah, no, I thought you were Aussie. Well, I used to go to Thailand as well, and I remember going to the Golden Triangle up. Not Chiang Mai. Is it Chiang Mai?
Yeah, Chiang Mai's at the top
Chiang
of
Rai.
Thailand.
It's Chiang Rai. I remember going up on the river in a canoe with an armed soldier.
Yeah.
And sleeping on the floor, and I loved it. I used to go to Thailand quite a lot, and I always remember one of the jobs I had at Ogilvy and Mather was to run the American Express business, and so I would go to every country, and I would deal with the American Express people. I'd do a seminar for them, meet the boss, and I always remember in Thailand that the boss of American Express was Greek. And we had lunch, and he told me what it was like there. He said the culture here is a bit different. And he said he had one client who had one American Express card and 7 supplementary cards. And I said, what are those for? He said, they're for his mistresses. He said every time one of his mistresses ignores him, he takes her off the card. So I had interesting times because I was a bit of a wild bugger when I was younger. And I always remember that there was a girl in London. There was a survey in the Advertising magazine to see who were the most employable people, who were people most likely to employ in advertising. And the first person was Martin Sorrell, whom I worked for later. And the second person was my receptionist in my agency in Soho, Marvell. Very sexy black girl. Very fond of her. And people all thought I was having an affair with her, which I wasn't. We had 1 or 2 pleasant evenings, but nothing more. And one evening I was there, and there was this absolutely stunning girl, very tall, also black, but American. who's a friend of hers. And I said, why don't you come for a drink, you two? So I took them out for a drink. And I said to the American girl after I'd had a few drinks, I said, would you like to come around the world? She said, what? I said, would you like to come around the world with me? I'm going around the world, because that's what I used to do. I'd go from one office to another.
Yeah.
And she said, you're kidding. And I said, I'm not kidding. She said, why? And I said, because my wife is always late. So if you can guarantee you can turn up on time, you can come around the world with me. So off we went around the world, including Australia, I remember, where we stayed, of course, in the English area, in Manly, where I've still got a very good friend there. I was there 2 years ago. And eventually we were in San Francisco. I was staying in the San Francisco Inn. The phone rang, and the voice at the other end said, hi, honey, it was my wife. And I said, oh, hi, how are you? She said, well, would you like to take me to dinner? I said, what? I said, where are you? She said, I'm here in town. I thought, oh. She said, oh, I've just been down to LA to get my hair done by Diana Ross's hairdresser. That was her way of telling me, I know what you've been up to, and I've just cost you a lot of money. I said to the girl I was in bed with, I said, I've got a bit of a problem. I said, we'd better get you another room. So I went down to reception. I said, have you got another room? And they said, yeah. So they're next to you. Is that the only one you've got? I said, yeah. So that night, of course, I took my wife out to dinner. I thought the least I ought to do is to make love to her. So I was making love, and my sort of temporary friend was next door listening to me, and I heard her because she's from St. Louis. And I'd said, you better go home to St. Louis and we'll meet in New York. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, I could hear thump, 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 as she dragged her case downstairs to catch the plane to St. Louis. So life was different then.
Yeah, very different.
I don't know whether it was. I mean, I don't know what people do now because I'm 83, but I still do try my best.
Yeah, I think you did pretty well. So yeah, was this like was advertising and copywriting the thing that that allowed you to have all these adventures, or is it more an entrepreneurial drive that was behind all this? How do you feel that was?
I did both, really. I tried to make money quite a few different ways, and I did, in fact, have one period in the late 60s when my partner and I, he was a young guy, had a business. We were doing really well. We were featured in the Times as coming young men. But unfortunately, we might have been cunning, but we weren't very cunning because we went into all kinds of stupid businesses. And we went spectacularly broke.
Yeah. And
the reason that I was traveling around doing all these strange things was because I owed so much money to the tax man. And so I kept on going back into advertising and doing different jobs for people. And to be honest, the big money that I made was when I sold my agency to Ogilvy. What happened was that somebody wrote a very stupid letter to Campaign, which at that time was the advertising magazine, and which suggested that David Ogilvy was, past it. And I wrote a letter saying this man's full of shit and not fit to kiss David Ogilvy's arse, etc.
Yeah.
And the next day, I got a phone call, and I was sitting next to my PA. We had an open plan office in Covent Garden, and the voice at the other end said, David Ogilvy here, very, very nice letter you wrote. So I sort of put my hand over the receiver, David Ogilvy on the phone. And the next thing that happened was I got another call the next day from the head of Ogilvy, and in England who was actually the most highly paid man in the British advertising business at that time. Very lovely man called Peter Warren. And he said, that was a very nice letter you wrote about David. And I put my hand over the phone and turned to my PA and said, Ogilvy wants to buy us. Because we'd already been approached by 8 of the top 20 advertising agencies. They were all buying direct marketing agencies. And so I sold the business to Ogilvy for what I now realise was a lot of money. But I suddenly realised that what the money that I got, the down payment I got, would today probably be worth about £1 million, you know.
Wow,
and that was just the down payment. I managed to get rid of most of it, or rather my my last wife did. She could spend people. I used to do a talk about. I always had 2 standing jokes. One was about women being unpunctual. People would say, "Go on, Drayton, everyone's unpunctual. All women are unpunctual." I said, "How about 2 bloody days late in Bombay?" That was why I stopped going around the world with them. And then I was saying that women are extravagant, and people, they're all extravagant. I said, how about buying a bloody house without telling you? She bought a house without telling me. She bought a swimming pool complex which cost more than the house and another house. And I would say, where do you get the money from? She said, don't worry, your credit's good. It was really, I mean, I don't know. I did not expect to be particularly successful. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing about advertising, obviously, when I saw it, nor did anyone else, and nor do most of them now. So I knew nothing about the business I went into. I knew nothing about business at all. I just thought if I was lucky, I'd get a good job, and I just happened to plunge into somebody saying, you do well in advertising. And then I studied, and I discovered that hardly anyone else did. And I thought to myself, wow, what a fantastic business to go into, where you're the only person who actually bothers to find out what the hell's going on. I said, this is really great. And still, it's the same. It hasn't changed. I did a speech in the last time I was in Australia 2 years ago. I went to New Zealand afterwards and did a speech in Auckland, and then another one somewhere else, Wanganui or somewhere, I can't remember, Wanganui, because I had a friend there. And I stood up in Auckland, and I said, I'm here to tell you something, that if doctors knew as little about medicine as marketers know about marketing, half the bloody population would die every year. Yeah? I collect the kind of drivel that I receive through the letterbox or I see online, because it's huge. People understand nothing about how to construct a headline, what kind of headline works. They have no idea. They have no idea. They don't know what kind of illustration works. They don't know how long the copy should be, and when it should be shorter, when it should be longer. They don't know the options you offer when you ask people to reply. They know nothing. I think it's still a great business to go into, as long as you realise that anybody who tells you it's easy is A, probably a liar, is a liar, and B, probably going to rip you off pretty quick. And you do get ripped off pretty quick now, because the law, there is no law. The internet is like the Wild West. Yeah. Yeah. You see somebody says, I live in Bristol, so you see a headline that says, Bristol woman thrilled to bits over funeral plan or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And nobody says, what woman is this? Show us where she said she was thrilled to bits. What funeral plan? What the fuck are you talking about? Nobody takes these people to task. It's like the days in the Old West when the medicine man would roll into town and sell people bottles of water, claiming they would. Yeah? Yeah. So it's a world of, it's the Wild West. It's a silly world. I mean, I'm delighted and thrilled and glad to have managed to make a living and do reasonably well. And mean, I've worked in 55 countries. What other business would have enabled me to go round to all these countries? I don't recommend Kazakhstan, by the way, because the national dish there is horse.
Never tried it.
But it's been a wonderful ride, and it's and I suppose the reason that I wrote the book that I've just finished was somebody said to me, somebody who worked for me said to me, you should write an autobiography. I said, that'd be ridiculous. She said, oh no, you should. And I said, I haven't done anything. I haven't fought any battles, won any wars, been courageous or heroic. I just played the fool for 50 years, you know. And she said, no, you've had a very interesting life. And now that I look at it, I have had an interesting life. And I doubt whether many other people have been as big a fool as I have. I worked out the other day, I have been run over by a car. I was the first man in the north of England to recover from a ruptured liver. I've been knocked over by a motorbike. I've been through the windscreen of a car. I've been stabbed by 2 women and nearly bled to death by being slashed by another. I'm trying to think I haven't been in any airplane accidents, like a train crash, I've done that. Almost every stupid thing you can do has happened to me. So, and that combined with working in a business that people are interested in, I mean, it's quite interesting. The other day, about 2 weeks ago, I read something online about Mad Men, you know, the television show.
Yeah.
And it said, the guy that I based Don Draper on, for the most part, was a man called Draper Daniels. And I thought, holy shit, I was trained by Draper Daniels when I was at Leo Burnett. He came in. I never knew who he was. He was actually the highest paid copywriter in advertising at that time. And he came in with another guy to teach us how to present. And he was really funny. They told us, they went to a presentation they'd done to a bank. And you know, somebody once said, I think it was the chairman of IBM, said that nothing happens in business until something gets sold. Yeah? Yeah. So learning to present was very important to me. And I realized when I was watching these guys that what they did was they made it fun. I mean, have you ever sort of thought, somebody said, oh, I'd like you to come to this presentation. Have you ever said whoopee? You'd always say, oh shit, not another. You know, God, I think I'll go have a drink. But they showed me, and David Ogilvy took me out to dinner one night. They took me out more than once, but in a hotel in London, very posh hotel in London. And halfway through the meal, he would say things out of left field, whether you wouldn't expect it. He suddenly said to me, do you know the secret of success? This was actually in Claridge's in Mayfair. He said, you know the secret of success in this business, Drayton? I said, no, David. He said, charm. And I remember my mother, this is how writing this has been interesting to me, because it's sort of conflating 2 different things, business and personal, because I remember my mother, when I was young, saying to me, Drayton, if only you were charming. And I remember we had an absolutely impossible woman running the Portuguese office in Lisbon, and my partner in America, a lovely man, Jerry Pickholtz, rang me up from New York, and he said, do you think you can try and sort that woman in Lisbon out? And I said, what do you want me to do? He said, just go and be your normal charming self. And I thought, wow, if only my mother had heard that. So life is full of surprises, some delightful, some not, but better than the alternative.
So how did you become charming then?
Well, I think, very good question. I think you become charming by just thinking about the other person. Thinking, what would I do actually, by and large, try to think of things that the other person would like to hear. I try to think of things that would make them happy. Yeah? Don't talk to them about the things that don't tell them they're boring. Tell them they're interesting. Tell them they're unusual. There was a very, very good story told by a lady 150 years ago who had met the two great British prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli and Gladstone. Met both of them. And somebody said to her, so what was the difference? She said, well, when I met Mr. Gladstone, I thought he was the most interesting person I'd ever met. And then she said, but when I met Mr. Disraeli, I felt that I was the most interesting person. And that's really, that's the difference. And that's what marketing's about. You have to persuade people that they are the most interesting people, that you're interested in them. Huh? Nearly all the bad, if we were to sit down and had sod all better to do and we're stupid, and so I think what we'll do now is go through all the bloody landing page, not websites that we can go through, yeah? I can guarantee that at least 75% would be talking about the company. We're so-and-so. This is what you get, again, on LinkedIn. We specialize in getting appointments for people. Fuck off. I don't care what you do. What have you got for me today? Huh? Yeah. That's what the secret is of success in this business. Thinking, if I say something where people will say, oh, they've got something for me. And then you prove that what you say is true. And then you deliver what you promised, plus a bit extra. My boss, when Ogilvy lived in his chateau, and he didn't really run the company. It was run by a guy called Ken Roman, very interesting man. And Ken invited me to breakfast with him in New York. And this is when he was saying, we'd like you to be the worldwide blah, blah, blah. And I was just fascinated by I'm fascinated by people, huh? So particularly interesting people. So I said, what do you think makes David different, Ken? And Ken said, He said, I'm pretty determined. He said, if I try something and it doesn't work, he said, I won't give up. He said, I'll try again and again. I'll try for a year. I'll try for 2 years. And only then will I give up. He said, but David never gives up. And I remember the man who edited Ogilvy on Advertising, which is a fantastic book, which most Ogilvy people haven't bothered to read, the idiots. I said to Joel, he was the creative director in Chicago, and we were having, I used to do a lot of drinks and dinners. We were having dinner one night. So I said, what made David special, Joel? And he said, when he was here in Chicago, he said he worked in the office, and I used to go in on a Saturday morning to do some work because I'm quite diligent, and David would already be there. And he said, and then I would go home on Saturday evening, and that would be it. And then I would drive past on Sunday evening, and David was still there. I don't think this is a recipe for success necessarily. I mean, it's just a comment about the kind of people who are successful. I'm not that diligent. I think I'm fairly hardworking and extremely lucky. Is that cardboard you sufficiently?
No, I could talk about this for another hour. But what I'm really looking forward to is your book, because I'm a reader like a lot of people, and so I can't wait for that to come out. Do you have a website?
It's
on your main
called
website?
You Did What? And it'll be all over the bloody place. You see it all over the place. You won't be able to miss it. On your group, it'll be mentioned on the beer, bourbon, and so on group. It has been mentioned.
Yeah.
It'll be like the bloody plague. You won't be able to miss it. Yes, it's called You Did What? And it's a very interesting cover, but not as interesting as the foreword is written by a man that I hired and trained, who's the vice chairman of Ogilvy and Mather, called Rory Sutherland. If anyone wants to know, Rory Sutherland is one of the funniest men alive, and he sent me at 3:00 this morning his introduction, which is absolutely hysterical, because he tells me things that I don't remember. I don't remember a lot, but he's written a very long introduction, which is extraordinarily funny, about what we used to get up to in Soho. And by God, we used to get up to something. I always remember in the agency I had, we used to arrange for people to have jaunts to make them happy. You know, people talk a lot about how to manage people, how to build loyalty, blah, 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 long books about it. It's all bollocks. I used to say, you know, I make them happy. Ogilvy came into Ogilvy and made the office in Soho where I was one day, and he said, Drayton, he said, tell me what you do. He said, you're not the chairman, you're not the creative director. He said, what do you do? And I said, I'm in charge of entertainment, David. He said, what do you mean by that? I said, my job is to make people enjoy it so much that they come in early and leave late and enjoy the intervening period. We used to have car rallies, and I remember we had where you were given keys to where you had to go to, and we took the whole staff down to a place on the south coast. It was a school actually, and I always remember the boyfriend of one of the girls who worked for me were climbing up the drain pipe to the 3rd floor of this place. This guy's now a High Court judge in England. All the good people are crazy.
Yeah, I see that.
I better stop.
So it's another great lesson. You have to have a little bit of crazy in you.
Well, thank you very much for talking to me, and I hope anyone who was listening enjoyed it.
Yes.
You did what?
Yeah, that's a book that if you're listening on iTunes, then go to geniusesofcopywriting.com. I'll put links to everything there. But yeah, I do appreciate you taking the time out to regale us with these stories. It's most entertaining, but also instructional. So
thank you very much.
I appreciate your time.
No, pleasure. I've got somebody else in half an hour.
I think of new books. There you go.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Thanks a lot.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Geniuses of Copywriting with Brian Casangina. To get the full transcript and all the resources mentioned on today's show, go to www.geniusesofcopywriting.com now.